Welcome everyone who's joined. This is our Open Networks Queue Management Processes webinar. Annie, would you mind just moving to the next slide, please? Thank you very, very much. So we're just waiting for Peter Turner to arrive. He's having a couple of Wi-Fi issues at the moment, which I'm sure we can all appreciate working from home. But I just wanted to take you through the agenda for today. So it's an hour-long webinar, and we'll kick off with introductions to the queue management team and a presentation from Peter and the rest of the team. And that will last about 30 minutes or so. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the back end, and we've left plenty of time for that in case anyone has any inquiries. Queue management team, is it worth one of us kicking things off with the slides, or would you rather just wait a couple more minutes for Peter?
I'm happy to wait a couple of minutes for Peter if everybody else is.
Great. Hopefully he won't be long.
Hello, Annie.
Hi, is that Peter?
It is. I'm dialing in on my mobile because I'm having connection problems.
No problem at all. So you're speaking to Emily, and we've just gone through.
Sorry, Emily.
Oh, no problem at all. We've just gone through the housekeeping and the agenda slides. So we are ready to move on to the presentation whenever you are, and a quick introduction to your team. So would you like me just to hand over to you now?
2 seconds. I shall. I'll have to get my. I've got a backup version of the slides, which I shall load up. Yes. Just it's struggling to log into Teams on my machine, which is a standard thing. But I have the slides. So we've done the introduction with the. Thank you for joining. Right, I shall launch straight in. So I'm on slide 5 while my machine catches up.
Great. We are too.
Yes, thank you. So, yes, welcome everybody. My name's Peter Turner. I'm the Commercial Manager for Connections and Agreements for Northern Power Grid. I'm also the Chair of the Queue Management Group. We'll also have on the call some of my colleagues. So I'll go straight into this, and as I'm doing the presentation, some of my colleagues will be answering any of the queries we've got on the chat function. We'll try and answer your questions sort of as they appear. If there's any where we maybe have to go away and consult with other members of the group or other colleagues that we work with, we will do that, and then we will summarize everything and get back to you. So I'm just on slide 5. A bit of a queue management roadmap. So under Open Networks, we've been developing improvements to the existing queue management process since 2018 with extensive sort of stakeholder engagement. And as you can see there, I won't go through that word for word, but there was a consultation in 2018 to provide stakeholders with a view of the network company's approach to queue management. And I should point out there, where we use the term network companies, it's a generic term for distribution and transmission parties. So the group's made up of transmission people, distribution people, and an IDNO representative. So there was also another consultation in 2019, which just set out the QM, if I call it QM, queue management policy framework. And you can see there's links there if anybody wants to check them offline. And then in 2020, the third consultation, which sought stakeholder comments on the user guide, based on the previous consultations which built up to that and our minded to position. And then what followed was the publication of the actual user guide, which is published on the ANA website. So if I just go to slide 6. So as you say there, queue management. So that this is the result of consultation feedback. So as a result of building on those 3 consultations and the working group, the user guide was revised, and the headline changes were that a simpler approach was adopted. So if milestone tolerances are exceeded, and I'll cover them off later, there's an intermediate stage ahead of contract termination whereby projects are sort of moved within the queue, right? Now, the other thing we did was we recognised that, albeit milestones have been in since 2016, there was a need to create a bit more leniency. So there's greater leniency through changes to the later milestones. Again, I'll cover them off, right? Because later milestones are when the project's underway, you know, maybe under construction, things like that. You know, the network operator can be working on the actual connections and things like that. Just see if my Teams is working again yet. And then there was also changes to what we call the cumulative delay, such that we thought it should only apply to earlier milestones. We also had a further explanation and improved clarity, which included additional descriptions of the milestones and how they are sequenced. Changes to clarify how potential transmission interactions are handled, revised diagrams to illustrate the application of tolerances and cumulative delay, etc., and also revised examples to illustrate how queue management works in practice. Now, the key point is network operators will implement the revised QM process on all new, that should be all, typo there, apologies, new or modified applications received on or after the 1st of July of this year. So, as well as that, obviously, as I mentioned, we've got transition colleagues on the group. A CUSC modification is being initiated to introduce a clause covering project progression that allows contract terminations where the milestones are not met. So just moving on to number 7.
Yeah, okay. 7's up.
Yeah, I'm just having troubles with my machine. Apologies when I just, yeah, so just close these windows a bit. Apologies. My machine is disobeying itself. Excellent. Right. So just a bit of a quick introduction to queue management. This sort of presupposes that people on the call, on the meeting, do have a sort of an understanding of it. Perhaps they've had a look at the guide, or they've been involved in queue management. So queue management is the process which manages contracted connections, i.e. connection offers or connection agreements in the case of grid, which have been accepted, and it enables the effective management of those contracted projects which are not progressing against agreed milestones. it avoids stalled or slow-moving projects from affecting other projects in the connections queue. And another issue which we were asked to look at was the ability to utilize flexible resources in connections queues to better utilize the available capacity. Now, the main components in respect of applying queue management are the milestones, which are benchmarks agreed between the network companies and customers to measure and track project progression towards the contracted connection date. And also, as I say, the milestones have been in since 2016, but we also introduced some tolerance, which provides some flexibility and recognises that some delays can lead to milestones not being achieved, but it provides the customer with an opportunity to get that project back on track. So just going to slide 8, please.
Slide 8's up.
Excellent. So this is just a simple diagram of how queue management would work, and I hope that sort of slide works, because I try to make it sort of uncomplicated. So just consider the following example. As you can see there in the diagram, you've got Q1, Q2, and Q3. These are it's the same queue, but progressing in a simple format. So in Q1, all the projects are accepted and are progressing against their agreed milestones. Now, the key thing to bear in mind there is you've got projects A, B, and C. They've accepted offers to connect without reinforcement being required. Now, those projects will use the available headroom. So you've got the red sort of reinforcement action or requirement. And then projects D, E, and F require reinforcement to be able to connect. And it's understood and they've accepted that. So you've then got Q2. Now on this one, project A has exceeded the tolerance, failed the milestone, and the contract has been terminated. So they haven't been able to get that back on track. So as you can see there in the diagram, project A is red, right? B and C are progressing as normal, right? And project D is offered and accepts the opportunity to advance up the queue and avoid reinforcement. So project A is leaving the queue. Project D is offered first because based on acceptance, they're first in that section of the queue. So as you go to Q3, you can see there, project D has moved up the queue, now utilizes the capacity freed up by project A. So the queue position is now, as you can see, B, C, D, reinforcement, E, and F. In that simple diagram, I've also assumed all of the projects were of a similar capacity, just for the ease of it. So just going to slide 9.
Slide 9's up, Peter.
Yeah, great, thank you. So this is just a bit of an explanation on milestones. As I've mentioned previously, the current milestones were developed in 2016 with quite a bit of industry work. They are unchanged. However, I should point out that a new milestone, which demonstrates project commitment, has also been included. Now, they represent the agreed key stages that require completion to allow a project to connect on time. They are intended to be transparent and realistic, and with an expectation that customers will undertake the relevant project development at key stages. They are supported by timescales and the requirement to provide suitable evidence at those stages. If a milestone and any applied tolerance is exceeded, then this could result in contract termination. So contract termination would mean you'd lose the queue position. The reason that says could is later on I'll cover off sort of mitigating circumstances, if you like. So I haven't done a full detailed explanation of all of the timescales and all of the evidence, because that is in the guide, but just a high level overview of the milestones. It's shown in the table. If I just quickly go through column 2 on that, it's initiate planning permission, if I paraphrase, secure the planning permission, secure the land rights. There's a transmission interface, so there are certain projects where the distributor has to consult with National Grid. They're all projects. You see, there's also, if the customer elects to go down the contestable route, there's the submission of the contestable works design, and then there's the provision and agreement of the construction plan. Then you've got that new milestone, which is project commitment, which is agreed as part of the construction plan, and then you've got project construction. So just go to slide 10, please. So we've got, you see from the heading here, this is the milestone sequence based on the previous diagrams. Now, this slide and the following slide are very similar, with this one saying no environmental impact assessment required. Now, when the milestones were originally created, it was recognised that if there's an environmental impact, the timescales need to be longer. So the first simple one is no environmental impact assessment. Now, for simplicity, I have assumed that there isn't any need for a transmission interface, because if there was a transmission interface requirement, what would happen is customer accepts the scheme. Within the offer, it would normally say, look, it's likely this is going to need a transmission interface, like a mod app type of thing. So that milestone would happen first before the others. So QM also recognises, and I think this is an important point, that there can be exceptional issues that customers cannot control and can lead to project delay. Now, I've covered that on slide 15. But as you can see there from the simple diagram, so the offer sent, a typical validity period is 3 months. It can be 6 months. One day I know does have 6 months. The customer accepts the offer, and then you've got parallel actions there, with, that can happen concurrently. There's the initiating the planning, securing the land rights, i.e., the developer's permission, the ability or permission to actually develop on that land. You've then got securing the planning permission. Once the planning permission is secured, right, you can agree the construction plan. The construction plan also contains all of the remaining milestones, which are just part of the general progression. Just going to slide 11, you can see similar, well, exactly the same layout, right? But this one has an environmental impact assessment. So once you accept the offer, and the timescales change along the bottom, once you accept the offer, there's a need to engage with third parties. This can be like surveys and things like that. So that is factored in, and then once that's successfully completed, you're onto the standard milestones, which are initiate, secure, etc. So just move down to the next slide.
We've just reached slide 12, which was sort of the halfway point for the presentation, where we put a little pause in to stop for any questions.
We've had a couple of questions on the chat, which your team are addressing now. So we had one from Kate, which I believe Will has just answered. And we had one from Barney, which Rashmi has answered. There is one remaining from Martin, which is it possible to promote flexible resources and particularly energy storage in the connection queue that can facilitate other connections? If so, could you share information about how this has worked in practice?
I'll just my team should be working anytime soon. Yes, sorry, I was just trying to get my my teams to work there. Yes, sorry, could you run that question again? Again, apologies, my IT's been acting up all week and
No problem.
Discussed. Yeah, go on. If you just paraphrase and I'll try and answer that one.
Yeah, so is it possible to promote flexible resources, particularly energy storage, in the connection queue that can facilitate other connections? If so, could you share information about how this has worked?
Yeah, yes. In the guide, we have an example of this. So in the simple example I used earlier on, if say all of the projects were, I mean, simple example, all the projects are say generation, and they were all the same size. You've got that reinforcement requirement, and the first person in the queue following reinforcement gets first refusal on the available capacity should somebody fail a milestone. Now, with flexible resources, the idea is, let's say the flexible resource, say it's battery storage, is right at the end of the queue, and no one has failed a milestone. All projects are progressing. The idea is you promote that flexible resource up the queue where it can alleviate a constraint and allow other customers to connect. Now, other parts of open networks are looking at the sort of the market mechanisms, and you know how it will actually happen. But the concept is that it will be promoted up the queue to alleviate a constraint, as opposed to, say, a generator being promoted up the queue because another project had stalled. Does that answer that question?
Thanks.
It does, yes. Thank you. I suppose just to expand a bit on that, if we have a queue of generators, say, and among them there's an energy storage facility, is it possible to promote that before the generators if, for example, there's reinforcement needed after a couple get connected, so that capacity is released and all three get connected prior to having to reinforce the network?
It is possible. It depends on the size of the connections. I mean, one of the reasons I just says for simplicity's sake, let's assume they're all the same size.
Mm-hmm.
Say they're all 10 MVA, just a random number. Then if you promote one battery of 10 MVA, you know, you can, and I'm glossing through some of the engineering on it, but you can promote one generator of 10 MVA, right? But if your battery's 10 and you've got a generator of 7 and a generator of 3, in theory, you can promote both of them up the queue. It's about there'll be a constraint on the network, and it could be just available headroom for capacity, right? And the idea of promoting the flexible storage is it offsets that reinforcement requirement, so that other generators can connect early. And also, I should say, when I was saying earlier about accepting the opportunity to move up the queue, the generator who's offered the opportunity to move up the queue has to be in a position to be ready to move up the queue and sort of progress with that project. You know, if for whatever reason a project they could have accepted early, but if the project was larger and had a longer time scale, they may not accept the opportunity.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Peter, we have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Your team, just to let you know, they are typing away and answering some other questions, but here's 2 that I just thought I'd read out.
Yeah.
So Lambert says, on slide 8, it shows queue management. It is slightly simplified as it doesn't consider dates. For example, if we have a site that has planning, can that jump the queue with a contracted project that does not have planning and maybe only pay for upgrades when needed?
No, and I've got the I've got the chat function up now, which is great. I'll tell you, right. I'll cover this off because I think I understand it. By all means, Lambert, if I don't answer your question, jump in. Now then, so you've got a project which is secured planning, and let's say I'll do it a different way. Let's say you've got on that simple example where I had A, B, and C didn't need reinforcement, and D, E, and F did, right? So imagine I'm always going to refer to that specific example. So say project C hasn't achieved planning yet, and project D has. Now then, project D can't move up the queue because project C hasn't failed the milestone, hasn't failed the tolerance, and still has the sort of capacity allocated subject to them progressing. I'm just looking here. So it doesn't consider dates. For example, if we have a site that has planning, can that jump the queue with a contractor project that does not have planning? Yeah. So in effect, the queue position hasn't been relinquished. Does that answer that question?
Okay, can I just expand it slightly? So thanks
Please.
for that. It does. So it's a real example. So we have a site where it's got planning permission for a wind farm 50 megawatts, and we can't get a date until 2028. Now, in reality, at the site where it could connect, right now there is capacity for it to connect, but the contracted position is full without further upgrades. Now, can't we jump the physical queue in terms of physically connecting to the site now in the next couple of years, but we are still liable for paying for the upgrades when they're needed? So there's like 2 separate things happening. One is, can we physically accelerate things because we're actually physically ready to go, versus the liability to paying for the upgrades to enable all the capacity to join at that point in the network?
Yeah. I mean, it's
Peter, sorry, it's Deborah here. I was going to maybe comment on that, if that's okay. Lambert, just in relation to that, I guess what you're describing as a current example, which predates the new policy coming into effect, and so obviously I can only speak on behalf of my own network, but that opportunity to advance if there are other parties that are not progressing, essentially for a consented scheme to move into that gap, albeit perhaps on a temporary basis. That does exist today. As I say, I can't speak on behalf of other network companies. I can only speak on behalf of from an SPT, SPD certainly perspective and SPM, but where there are gaps in queues such that another party could take advantage of that. And as I say, that may be on a restricted basis or a temporary basis, subject to exactly your point, that they would still be liable for upgrades should the other parties still come along to connect. So I think if that's something you have, that might be worth a discussion with the relevant network company to see if that's something they would be able to offer to you.
Great. Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
I suppose the other thing I'm always conscious of is queue position. Yeah, whatever queue position you are with respect to queue management, it's relevant if you need to move up the queue. So in our simple diagram of A, B, and C don't need reinforcement, and D, E, and F do need reinforcement. A, B, and C aren't actually in a queue, right? That A, B, and C are only in that queue order because of the acceptance dates, right? In reality, A, B, and C, as separate customers, are developing their projects. If, say, B, for whatever reason, was able to progress, and again, I'm simplifying and assuming they're all the same size and they're all the same type. Let's say B had all of everything in order and could really progress and connect before A. It doesn't impact A at all, and it doesn't impact C at all, because they've each been offered some of the available capacity. Now, what impacts D, E, and F? Now, D, E, and F are all progressing their projects, right? But their queue position is relevant if somebody higher up the queue gets terminated, right? Nobody wants that, but if they get terminated, that queue position is relevant for that reason. So was any? I've got the chat up, which is great. So any other questions we need to cover?
There's a few more. We've got one from Christy, one from Barney. However, Gregory's just oh no, that's for Will. So I tell you what, I'll move to Christy's question, which was slightly further up. Isn't there an issue with treating all projects of all sizes to the same restrictions? Is it possible to have 132 kilovolt connected large solar parks that don't require an EIA but still need extensive surveys before planning can be submitted?
Right. Yes. Now then, we are covering this later on. There's a section of the guide which were drafted very, very carefully, and it's called Issues Out with the Customer's Control. I'm definitely covering that exact point later on, Christy. So the second part where it says, 132 connected large solar park doesn't require an EIA, but still extensive surveys are required. Myself and one of my colleagues who couldn't be present today, Brian Hoy, did meet with a couple of meet via Teams, a couple of DJ stakeholders who did raise this issue. So the group has addressed it, and additional clarity is going in the guide. So if it's okay, I'll cover that later. I'm definitely covering it. I'll just cover Coroban. Will the new QM methodology apply retrospectively to agreements signed prior to July? For distributors, no, not automatically, right? If you signed, and it doesn't matter which DNO it is, I'll say us, NPG. You signed the connection offer last year. Your connection is based on the terms in that connection offer. Now, I'll just say it's AHV. Now, our AHV letters do make reference to milestones, the published ANA milestones, right? but the new QM process of tolerances and cumulative delays, I could only apply that to your project if you agreed, if both parties agreed. Because the thing is that the revised QM process is actually a bit more flexible, because previously, like, you know, today, if you like, because before the 1st of July, today, right, it's quite binary, it's quite cliff edge. You fail a milestone, that's it. I mean, there is some flexibility built in the existing milestones, but we've added in these tolerances because, and I think the other colleague, Will Bourne, phrased it quite well on one of his emails to me. What Ofgem want and what the ANA want is for those projects which are progressing and genuinely trying to progressing to connect. That's what we want. But if a project's irrevocably stalled, right, we'll have to move that project out the queue to facilitate other projects connecting. So I'll just cover off as well from a now when I answered that question retrospectively, because that's from a distributor perspective. With respect to CUSC, and I'm sure my colleagues will correct us if I get this wrong, but I don't think I will. If I just say grid, because it's actually National Grid ASO, right? Or we've got ASO and TSO. They won't be retrospectively applying it to agreements pre-1st of July, right? From the 1st of July, it's effectively new applications, right, that it will apply to. I see Isabel Morris, surveys, cover that off later.
Yeah, and there's another one from Lambert as well. Would you like to run through the remaining slides and then we could go through these?
Yes, I'm happy to. Yes, happy.
Great. We're just at 20 to 3. So should we say we'll ideally leave 10 minutes for questions at the end? Is 10 minutes okay for the final bit of your presentation?
I'll talk faster. I promise. It's always my fault. It's always my IT. Everybody, apologies. I'm always apologising.
We're just on slide 13 now. Tolerance.
Slide 13. I'll motor through this, but I'm happy to answer questions. So tolerances and project status, right? Quite straightforward. It looks like a lot on this slide, right? The key bullet: tolerances allow customer to manage reasonable delays without the risk of having that contract terminated if they fail a milestone. So that cliff edge failure, you effectively get a tolerance period, and they're indicated in the table below. I'll just pick the AHV one, which is 6 months, right? You get an allowance of 6 months to spend, in inverted commas, how you like. So you could spend 6 months on one milestone, or you could spend 2 months on 3 milestones. So it's sort of it's a flex. I was going to say I used to call it the yellow card arrangement rather than the straight red, but I'm not a football fan. But it's that recognition where, you know, the project's still on track, but you've hit a delay that you know you can manage. So on track's exactly what it sounds like. If you start using the tolerance, you're within the tolerance period. You know, one or more has been exceeded. I'll cover cumulative delay later. If you exceed the milestone period and the tolerance period, it's termination. The project has not met the milestone and it's been terminated. As I say, I'll cover cumulative delay and issues out with later. I'll just quickly go to slide 14, which is cumulative delay. So there's differences in how tolerance is applied for earlier and later milestones. For earlier milestones, we've got this concept of cumulative delay, so that delays against the milestones are added up and compared to the relevant tolerance period. Effectively, what it recognises is you've got a total tolerance. So when I quoted that AHV one, you haven't got 6 months for every milestone. So those were the bullets there. And again, so that's what we call earlier milestones, which were the sort of the planning and the land rights, and the sort of, to an extent, the transmission interface. Now, later milestones, this is where you've got the planning and you're well on with the project, right? So, but we're not using cumulative delay for later milestones, as it allows a bit more sort of leeway against the milestone date as a project moves sort of into its construction phase. I.e., if you've developed a quarter of your solar farm, you know, and we've installed 80% of the assets, you know, me and you definitely don't want the project terminating. But it has to be recognised, you know, if there was some sort of delay which was, you know, scuppered the project, that has to be recognised. And then just a final point there, for later milestones, after the construction plan has been agreed, the delay against specific milestones is compared to the relevant tolerance period. So I'll just go to slide 15. So just slides 15, 16 and 17 is just explaining the concept of cumulative delay. So very simple. I've just said an HV project, no EIA, environmental impact, no transmission interface required. Just to clarify, if any project requires the distributor to interface with grid, you don't fail any milestones until that interface process, which is standard sort of industry governance type process, is completed. Because what it means is, I go to the grid, say, I've got this project, blah, 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 X, Y, Z. Grid come back and say, we've got work doing. It's going to cost X pounds, right? I'll tell you what that amount is. You know this because you don't know the amount, but you know I'm going to go to the grid because I'll have written it in the letter. I'll tell you that. You need that information to decide whether you're progressing with the project. So it isn't reasonable that you could fail to get planning permission when you haven't got all of the costs. So that's just a key point there. So on this one, the securing the land rights is delayed 2 months, but it's within the allowed tolerance of 3 months. So that's perfectly acceptable, right? And as I say, it's within tolerance. So just going to slide 16, same type of project. I'm just saying HV, right? On this one, securing the land rights is delayed by 2 months. Securing planning is delayed by 3 months. The project has exceeded the allowed tolerance and the project status is termination. Obviously 2 plus 3, 5, you know, you're allowed 3. And then quickly on to slide 17. Again, same project. Now this is a concurrent delay. So initiate planning, 2 months delay. Secure land rights, 2 months delay. The delays are concurrent, i.e. they don't impact each other. Initiating planning and securing land rights can happen in parallel, right? So what we're saying is the delay remains at 2 months and you would still be within tolerance. And just going to 18. This is probably one of the most important slides in the pack, right? And this is where I'll cover off the earlier person's question, Isabel as well, yes. So, queue management recognises that there could be exceptional issues that the customer cannot control, but it could lead to project delay, could lead to milestone failure, right? Now then, we've included what these are, but they're not limited to, i.e. we deliberately didn't try to produce a big exhaustive list, because if you do, somebody else will think the 2 other valid ones to add to the list. We're just trying to get the concept across. So, force majeure, a lot of people will be familiar with that. I've paraphrased it here. A contract provision that excludes a party from not performing contractual obligations because it becomes impossible or impractical, right? So anything that's force majeure, you wouldn't fail the milestone, right? Another example, planning appeals and third-party challenges, you know, that's outside your control as well. Now then, this next one is specifically to cover off the survey, because when we had the stakeholder meeting, one of the stakeholders made a very valid point. Originally, when EIA and non-EIA were created, the concept, it was thought that your surveys, because the EIA is actually a set of regulations, environmental impact assessment regulations. So it was thought where they apply have longer timescales. But it turns out planning authorities can legitimately say, I require a survey, even if the project isn't an EIA recognised project. So we've created these words, and this clarity will go in the guide, where a relevant authority places an obligation on the project which could cause the milestones/tolerance timescales to be exceeded and change the project status. So you would, I've covered this off later on, it is the customer must obviously comply with certain conditions. They have to discuss the delay with the network operator at the earliest opportunity, excuse me, and they must provide reasonable evidence to justify that delay, right? So we made it relevant authority, and I trust people will recognise the sort of term relevant authority. Basically, any party who can say to you, you must do this. You know, for a distributor, say, doing our work, a relevant party could be Ofgem. Ofgem can say to us, you must do this. You know, they're like a relevant. So we're trying to make it general. We haven't specifically written it just for surveys. We've tried to write it generally so that at some point in the project, come and talk to us, tell us what your delay is, you know, and then we can discuss it. Now, in fairness, it is projects experiencing delays of an exceptional nature that can be like placed on hold and the customer's connection terms maintained, but the onus is on the customer to justify that delay. So it's a case of you have to tell us about that delay, because it might be something we're just not going to be aware of. Again, any failure to comply with any of these conditions can result in the failure of a milestone, change in project status and termination. So I think, yeah, the next one's the implementation plan. So I suppose, did that answer the question from the two people who raised that? I'm just whizzing up these listed. There we go. I'm just looking at the chat thing here because the next slide's the implementation plan. Yeah. So Christy Sims. Yes. It's possible to have a 132 connected large solar parks that don't require an AIA but still need extensive surveys. That specific inclusion was created because of that requirement. The URICO, because as again the stakeholders, there's two stakeholders, DJ stakeholders, and one of them gave us details of there was something like 8 or 9 projects. None of them were EIA, right? Just absolutely none of them. But I think there was 8, and I think 7 of them required a bird survey. And the bird survey, just people who don't know, it was like 2 seasons, which is 2 years. But I was chatting to away these people, you can get birds, bats, newts, bees, I think. So yes, so I think that one's that. I think I've covered that. And then I think Isabel Morris.
We're just coming up.
Question.
We're just almost coming up to the 5 minutes left mark, Peter. So there's 2 more questions in the chat that I might just check.
Well, we're on to that now, so we can take them now by all means. Apologies for me rattling on.
Oh, perfect.
Go on, I've got the chat up. Who am I looking for, please?
I just wanted to check a question from Lambert at 1437. Has that been covered? Could a top tier project be demoted instead of terminated? What is the logic for termination instead of demotion?
There you go. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Yes, yes. Now then. Good question, Lambert. We've done 3 consultations. Following the second consultation, the guide was drafted so that if you think back to my simple diagram where project A is terminated, we had a process by which project A was terminated and then went to the end of the queue, right? And was requoted. And by end of the queue, it means they now require reinforcement to connect, right? Now, as a result of some sort of stakeholder engagement, we decided to remove that step and make the process simpler, because the core concept of QM is, right, your project achieves certain milestones. If it doesn't hit the milestone, your offer can be terminated. Now, moving it to the end of the queue, you'd be requoting it, right? If the project's terminated, that customer can reapply for exactly the same kind of connection offer, right? But obviously, I would imagine from their perspective, they'd have to consider what was it didn't happen on their project, you know, that caused the milestone to fail. Say, for example, and I'm sure there's customers on this call know lots more than me about this, but if you didn't get planning, I would imagine you'd go away and you'd speak to your colleagues in your project team and you'd go, right, why didn't we get planning? Right? Do we have to change something about this project? So you might not be applying for exactly the same thing, you know. I don't know, you know, you could be applying for smaller capacity or a different technology or whatever, but that was the concept of it. But it certainly doesn't stop anybody reapplying. But yeah, your queue position is end of the queue. Did that hopefully I've answered that. Was any others?
There was one final one that I've spotted from Christy, just at the back end of the chat. I'm concerned about the statutory delay limits. Currently, it can take a month or more to pin down the D&O project manager to a meeting. Would you like me to read out the rest, or have you got that one up?
I've got it. Well, let me.
If anyone could add into the chat if I've missed your questions, I think they've all been answered by the team. We've got one more just in from Gregory, but Peter, I'll leave you to answer.
Well, I'll answer that one. I'll answer that one first. On issues out with, right? And again, my apologies, but I was going that quick. I missed it out because I was explaining relevant authority. Another issue outside the customer's control is any delay which is caused by the network company, e.g., the customer is awaiting a required input from the network operator. So if you are waiting for the network operator to do something, that's not your delay. You can't be penalised for that delay. So let me just go up and just make sure. Come on. That's it, right. So I'm concerned about these statutory delay minutes. Currently, I'll just read this one. Pin down. Right. Yeah. So yeah, if you're struggling to pin down, you know, the network operator, project manager, you know, or you know, we've hit another problem somewhere. I don't know. Say there was a major incident and there was a massive flood and we had to send all our people to do that and it delayed your new business project. That's outside of your control and it's clearly in the guide. There was another one you said, I think. Let's go to new messages.
Gregory, and that's the last question that we have.
Yes, hello Gregory. Yes, I've met Gregory. Can we have some sort of commitment from the ANA that this can be re-evaluated in 12 months or so? I can still say, one second. Yeah, the way I've been discussing with the, it does, I'm going to go to slide 19 because we have factored it in. I updated. This is the implementation plan, right? It's basically a summary of all the points I've made earlier. Now then, what's going to happen? What's going to happen after this meeting is we're going to collate all of the questions that's being asked. I see it as a table. There'll be a column with, you know, who asked the question, what was the question, what did we say on the day, and then the queue management group's going to meet and go through every single one of these again, right, and agree what sort of formal response, if it's a formal response. You know, what did we say? Yes, you know, do we need to expand on that? Because I'm conscious in a chat function, you know, obviously you get to do a sentence or two. So we're going to go through all of them. So the point Gregory's made about can it be reevaluated in 12 months or so? Part of the action we'll have to do, which is what we're actually completing now, which is why the implementation says Q3 PID action. We'll have to do a review. So part of the responses from this webinar are part of that review. If we decide there's areas where we can provide additional clarity, like for instance that relevant authority, that's a bit more clarity. It doesn't change the concept of issues out with, but it covers off your sort of bird survey, right? Gregory's point will be put on there. Now this will be fed back to the what's called the workstream 2 group. There's different levels of groups manage open networks. We'll field all of these back to that group with a recommendation. If there's anything significant which you know might need to be factored into next year, you know, whatever next year's open networks is, it'll be for that group to sort of decide, because they own the PID. There's the project initiation document. They own it, so it can be factored in if it's considered as it should be. So again, I have updated this plan, but I literally did it yesterday with one of the other NA colleagues. And the gist of it is, I've gone through all the other sort of roles. We are going to do a feedback session of the group, as I said. We're going live. The 1st of July is distribution companies going live for all new or modified connection applications. So new applications. So if you applied in June, you aren't on the new process, but for distribution, you know, the existing milestones can apply, right? Transmission companies, again, new or modified applications. They call it clock start date, but it's effectively new or modified applications. In parallel with that, and it was a point raised as part of the last consultation, we are going to do a CUSC modification. CUSC has a standard industry governance process, so that for transmission, certain aspects of queue management will go into CUSC, subject to that process completing. And then the final action, and then I'll hand over to anybody, is this Q3 action is, you know, identify any further steps for improvement, you know, which is factoring in these comments. You know, we've had meetings with a couple of stakeholders. So. And that's me. Any?
Thank you, Peter. We did have a final question from Christy, but I wonder if perhaps, did you want to take a look at it and then perhaps respond directly to Christy after the webinar?
Well, I can answer this one as well very quickly. If there's an escalation process, if a DO owner developer disagrees, it's covered in the guide. It's before or after, it's near the end, but it's before or after the issue's out with, and it recognises that for a distributor, I'll be really quick. For a distributor, if me and you disagree on any project, regardless whether it's QM or not, you know, you disagree with something or you've got an issue, you come and talk to us, and the process is you come and talk to us, we try and resolve that issue with you. If we can't resolve that issue with you, you have the option to go to Ofgem and seek their input on it. So the key point is there is an existing disputes escalation process, industry process, and we aren't planning any changes, and we've advised Ofgem of this, and we're happy with that. We aren't proposing any change to the existing industry disputes resolution escalation process, which I think was your point, Christy. And then Rashmi's covered off. Thank you, Rashmi. Rashmi's covered off from a CUSC perspective. Distribution and transmission, slightly different arrangements, which I won't go into. Right. Apologies for taking so long. I'll hand back to the ANA.
No, thank you so much for your time today, Peter. I hope everyone found that useful. It was certainly a very engaged chat, which is what we love to see. If you have any other questions at all, I've put our email address into the chat. It's just the usual opennetworks@energynetworks.org. And Peter, unless there was anything else you would like to wrap up, I suppose it's just to say everyone have a great weekend and thank you again for joining.
Yes, thank you everybody. I personally felt that went well, and there were some very good points raised, which is genuinely good because you want to see people raising points. So yes, thank you all, and thank you to my colleagues for assisting with all of them questions and that. It sounds like I do all the talking, but it isn't. There's a team effort involved. So thank you all.
Very true. Thank you to Will, Rashmi and Deborah from the team.
And thank you for the ANA guys as well.
See you soon.
Okay, thanks all. Bye.
Bye.